Thank you very much, and welcome. Maybe while we're connecting the computer, I'd like to first apologize for the delay in starting this talk today. We were diverted and digressed by the beautiful landscape around. And also, I'd like to thank Peter and also the lovely team here at the Kunsthaus for organizing this fantastic event. So, I'd like to perhaps start with a few words along with the introduction from Peter to describe a little bit about our studio, because it's unusual, not so much only in the way in which we produce things or maybe the products of what we do in the studio, but also in terms of the structure of the studio. Not deep enough? No. Yeah? Okay. We are a relatively small studio of around 20 people. We fluctuate between 18 and 25 people. And have quite ferociously resisted the urge to grow beyond a certain number or to shrink beneath a certain number. And this is to allow Ron, as someone who's very connected to the making of things, to still be in touch with every single project that comes out of the office. So it's something that's not only important to our clients, but also something that we feel is very integral to the way in which we work. So every project, regardless of whether it's a door handle or a very large building, evolves from a very personal, intimate dialogue with Ron that involves sketching, etc. So I'm going to describe in a few slides this process just to introduce you to our office. This is the gate of our studio in Camden, in North London, which is made of Corten steel, which I will refer back to shortly. And this is by way of saying the street in which we're placed as a studio is quite a dirty street. It's very lively in terms of its proximity to a very active market, Camden Town Market in London. We have many visitors, some welcome, some not so welcome. So the gate is really the first interface between the very urban context in which we work and our studio, which is a workshop really to begin with. So you can see Ron here inside working at his desk. You can just about make out in the background some of the original roof joists of the Victorian dairy farm that used to be our studio. So Ron took on this space 20 years ago and made it into a showroom for some of the pieces he produced, and slowly it became more of an office and less of a workshop, if you like. But still to this very day, Ron sits and works in 2D mostly, drawing and sketching, and people come by his desk and talk to him and develop ideas, and he will come and visit various people around the office and work with them on the various projects that they are engaged with. You can just about make out here on the tablet that Ron is working on a poster that he was designing at the time for an exhibition we had at the Barbican Museum in London. It's called Restless, which is how Ron, when asked to define himself, would probably say he's a restless person. What you can see there is a sketch for a reinterpretation of a very classic signature piece of Ron's from the late 80s, from 1988, called A Big Easy, which has these very recognizable Mickey Mouse ears for supports. They echo also his hat, which is quite iconic. And the reason I show this is because this very old photo that was taken at the workshop shows a piece that Ron drew with a 6B pencil and made by hand by rolling and coercing the metal to do what he wants, and then welding it and polishing it. And when 30 years later, sorry, we were requested to create something very, very special and iconic for a museum exhibition we had at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Ron decided to take that seed, this creative seed, and reinterpret it in a modern way, in a contemporary way that's more akin to how we perhaps work today as a studio. And you can see these computer diagrams showing a chair, or an echo of a chair, the same chair made out of spheres or bubbles. There are 144 spheres, each one cut and intersected differently to its neighbor, but in a way that offers a structural stability. And once the design has been completed as a hand sketch, and then as a computer sketch, if you like, it goes to the inevitable, very traditional manual process of spinning these spheres individually, and then marking them, cutting them, numbering them, assembling them, welding them, polishing them, revisiting the geometry, and that's something that Ron is very personally involved with as a process. So it's not something that we send to a workshop somewhere and wait to receive the box back when it's finished. It's very much a hands-on process, even though it evolved in the computer. And the product of this process is the creation of this pair of chairs, which are a positive and a negative of each other. So if you took these two and combined them, you'd get the original chair from 30 years ago. So you can see that these three positives correlate to these three negatives, etc., etc. And this is a combination of stainless steel that is then acid-edged in a different part. So this was very much the centerpiece of a very large show at that moment. And the reason I chose to start with an object rather than with a building is to really describe this interpretive process. So it involves the hand making, it involves the computer modeling to check and verify various relationships that would otherwise be quite complex to resolve manually. And it involves a process of revisiting old ideas and reinventing them. We'll move on to a later project, which is a hotel we did in Rimini, in Italy, coastal town on the east coast of Italy. When we were approached to work on this hotel, this is what it looked like. It was the Italian headquarters of Weight Watchers, very important. And very typically, like many regional towns with small hotels within these little medieval streets, the building itself couldn't really be touched on the outside. We had very limited scope, even though we really wanted to not just refurbish the interior, but to carry some of that novelty out to the outside. So we proposed a delicate touch to the outside of the building, which would involve wrapping a continuous bronze skin that would begin on the first floor, become the backdrop to a new terrace, and then wrap its way into the public spaces of the hotel. It's a very small hotel, 40 rooms. And the idea was with one bold statement that involved a very traditional, familiar material from the Italian public realm, create that continuity from outside to inside that would herald the new, let's say, the new life of that building. You can see two photographs, one of the building before we arrived and one after we left. So it's a subtle intervention, but one that then unfolds as it works its way in. Worth mentioning, being in Austria, that at the time when we worked on this project, the smoking ban came into effect, and at the time most of us were smokers at the office, and we provided a dedicated seat for smokers outside near the entrance, just to be sensitive to their needs. You can see, as you walk past that bench, the introduction of an entrance foyer that draws you into a very different interior, very different entrance experience to the one that was perceived before. And these red flippers, quite thick doors, are the fire doors, which we opted to enlarge and make thicker than they need to be to really emphasize that they are not standard doors. So rather than try and shrink fire doors so that they look like very delicate traditional doors, we opted to join them instead of meeting them. And as you glimpse past them, you see this very strange toroidal object behind. And the idea for this object was to define a space within the lobby, which is not very large, in which you could have a reception and all the back-of-house offices that are common for hotels and quite close to the reception, without having to partition the small space down into rooms. So the idea was, again, born out of a hand sketch that evolved into a series of diagrams and studies, and from there into a similar workshop process in which there's a rigorous translation of a rather complex form into a continuous skin. And that involves, again, a very meticulous process of wrapping sheets of stainless steel on the skeleton, numbering them, adjusting them, welding them, polishing them, until this becomes one cohesive, coherent form. Almost like a ship within a bottle, but you can't quite understand how that made it inside that lobby. How is that contained within that lobby if it arrived as one big piece? It's 4 meters high and 6 meters deep in the space. And you can see that this is both reception desk and kind of defines the zone of the reception, where behind we opted for very, very simple vertical slat walls made out of aluminium that would define the manager's office, the deputy manager's office, etc. Going along with that theme of almost too big to be contained within the space, the bar, which is the main gathering space within this hotel, became a very large object, far too large in a way for the scale of this hotel. But we convinced the owner of the hotel not to create a breakfast room and a restaurant and a bar, because in a hotel of that size it would be very difficult to operate. It's a seasonal city that empties during the winter months, so it was very important to create something that's very attractive also for the residents of Rimini at large that could come and enjoy hanging out in during the winter months or the autumn months that are mostly empty of tourists. So this island is disrupted by the structural columns that hold the old building up, and effectively offer a series of fjords or bays that are carved around the columns, and in that way you can have a very informal way of eating meze or using this as a bar at night. And in fact, this is a very, very successful space. It's probably the most successful space in the hotel. And further back behind that bar, the same wall that starts in the first floor terrace wraps down to the ground and becomes the back banquet cafe. A few other little touches worth mentioning. This is a bathroom, a public toilet, in which Ron decided to continue with the theme that he started 20 years earlier at the Belgium restaurants in London, which is to mix men and women in the toilets, not to necessarily segregate between them. So these are a series of two-way mirrors which allow you to peek through into the ladies' toilets and peek back into the men's toilets. Obviously not the toilet cubicles themselves, but the common space where you wash your hands, you can actually stare and have a sign language conversation with someone standing behind the glass. And the bedrooms themselves are not a extreme departure from traditional arrangements of hotel rooms in terms of plan, but where we try to be a bit more flexible or clever with the design of these rooms, is that of the 44 rooms, no two are alike in terms of plan. The building is very irregular, it's also sagged, warped over the decades. There are structural columns that are not continuous and don't stand above each other. So the whole building is quite deformed in a way, and that means that every one of these 44 rooms is slightly different. So we decided to create this, don't really like the word pod, but it's an element that can dock in one of the corners and house the bathroom facilities, and also forms the backdrop for the bed. So as you walk into the standard room. You have a curved wall that encloses the bathroom instead of a straight corridor wall. It is normally open, so it allows you a glimpse of the bathroom and a glimpse beyond the bathroom in the form of the circular window. The idea behind the circular window was that we couldn't control in every room how the bathroom would relate to the external facade. And we didn't want to create windowless bathrooms. So the bathroom has a window that you can open with an internal louver and look out of the main hotel room facade out onto the street. So it offers you the control over the level of privacy and level of transparency between the bathroom and the rest of the room. And the bathrooms are made as wet rooms with a levitated floor, which means that you can splash around and make as much mess as you want. It's very clean and relatively simple. And then if there's a larger room, there's an opportunity to expand onto a kind of small living area. I would like to now move on to a slightly different scale of a project. This is the Design Museum Holon. It's the first national museum dedicated to design in Israel. One of the fundamental things that were very interesting about this project was how it was created, the inception of the idea of the project, before we even started designing it. We were approached by the city of Holon, which is a small town of at the time 140,000 residents, not so small, not a big city. It's a satellite town just south of Tel Aviv that prides itself on being one of the few local authorities in the country that have a budget surplus every year, because the relatively well-behaved population pays taxes on time, and the city is very responsible in reinvesting those funds back into the city. In fact, it's over 20 years taken itself from the #1 crime-infested city to being the greenest, friendliest city to raise children in terms of value for money, in terms of quality of life. And we were approached by the mayor of the city to introduce this museum. And while we were very flattered and honored, the first thing Ron said was, "What's your program for this museum?" And he said, "What's a program?" And we started a debate about what it means to commission a museum. And I think this is a very important point. It's worth dwelling on, especially in a conference of this kind, is to talk about the processes that happen before we start putting form to program. And we replied to the mayor saying we would be honored to design this museum. Before we embark on this process, we would like to identify and define a program. We can either help you find something to do this, or we can work together with you to create this program. And that started from a very simplistic, I'll show you a series of slides that are very maybe simple in nature, because they were also circulated around the city. Very much invited conversation from the residents of the city of Holon about what is design, what do we term design. We have traditional fields, and it's intentionally fuzzy on this slide. Architecture, fashion, interior, industrial, product, graphic design. They are very familiar fields that we can append the word design to. But there are a whole sphere of peripheral design areas that are maybe not usually recognized, or not usually given a platform or a place to debate and showcase those designs. Another process that this program writing period covered was an analysis of existing design museums around the world. And design museum as an entity is a relatively young, new one. Commonly, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London is referred to as the first or the oldest design museum. But certainly, I would say that's not a very accurate definition, because it's a museum that housed many other different kinds of collections. And in fact, design museums that are defined as such alone are a relatively new 50-year-old phenomenon. And certainly at the time when we started this project, there was no purpose-built museum of design anywhere in the world. During the life of construction of this project, 2 more museums have been built, which is testament to the recognition of the importance of showcasing design in a museum on its own right. So aside from mapping existing institutions, again, propose, we also analyzed the general trend in museology to take exhibits away from object-based exhibits to more narrative-based exhibits in which a curator is free to weave a story around different objects from different collections within a museum. The Tate model is a very good example in London, a few very good examples elsewhere in the world, where it is okay, it's better than okay to decide as a curator to put a Renoir next to a Max Ernst, next to a Barbara Kruger in the same gallery, and create a kind of narrative through this meeting of different exhibits from different periods or from different artists or from different disciplines. And finally, we help the client map what is a likely aim for this museum in terms of the client, like the visitor, the user types that might use it, academics, groups of children from schools, locally and internationally, tourists, etc., etc. And really, if we isolate the six kind of most particular aims of the program from the client's point of view was to establish the museum as a brand, as an icon. And in fact, they couldn't resist the very popular reference of the Bilbao effect. You know, how do you take a ex-industrial city and leverage it up to international recognition through architecture? Even though the scale here is very different and the budget here is very different. But certainly the brand presence of the city of Holon on a wider map than its own city. The wide spectrum of user groups that we could appeal to. The use of the circulation routes as a curatorial device. So let the curator adopt more than just a gallery or two. Let them adopt the stairwells, let them adopt the lifts, let them adopt the corridors. Connectivity and modularity. And two very important links, the links to industry and the links to younger users. And it's worth mentioning that Holon still has the second largest industrial estate in Israel. And the industry is very keen to forge links with designers and young graduates as they come out of the various colleges and universities around Israel. And the link to younger users, as I mentioned before, this has become a very child-friendly city in terms of facilities. And after this process, which took approximately 3 months and culminated in a report that went into quite a lot of detail, we began the design process and we could see that these are not very precious sketches, they're kind of very loose, immediate pen to paper or virtual paper sketches that explore relationships between masses. And the relationship here, even though the building ended up looking very, very different, the relationship that's worth mentioning here, because it lasted to this very day, is the juxtaposition, the separation of one gallery from the next vertically, and the encouragement of people to walk along an experiential route that ties these two galleries together. So the passage through the museum is as important as the relationship between you as a spectator and the exhibits that you are coming to see. This very low quality old phone clip shows Ron tearing bits of paper in our garden in the office. The reason I show this is because one of the earliest discussions we had, and there's a common misconception perhaps, that high quality design costs a lot of money. Ron has a saying that I'm very fond of, which is a title of one of the chapters in one of the books he's published, where he's asked what is design. He says, things we don't need but can't afford. And I think that's very appropriate. So we really try on a regular basis to really revisit how can we create something that is very impressive and very appropriate for the purpose that we are creating it for, but without robbing the bank. And as this is a local authority, with local authority budgets, there's not 1 cent of donations from this museum. It's all built on taxpayers' money. So the responsibility is great, and the complexity here was great. So the idea of the ribbons was a way of simplifying a language of very three-dimensional curves or very complex biplanar surfaces into a language of ribbons that are all vertical in section. So every one of these ribbons is only bent in one plane. And this was the image we produced as part of the first presentation to the client. There were some key elements here. One of them, of course, is the ribbons that take visitors from where the bus stops are, where the parking area is, and leads them into the museum and through it like a silver lining. And the other one is this relation of color that you see, which got us into a lot of trouble, because we naively thought that we could arrest the corrosion of corten steel. Corten steel, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, a material that's very familiar from the art of Richard Serra, for example, is an alloy in which corrosion actually serves to protect the metal from further corrosion. So it's very useful for structural applications, or other structural properties that are very particular to it. But we really enjoy the integrity of the material. It would be unthinkable for us to paint this building red. So we thought we could start this corrosive process and then stop like the film and get this grade of color. That proved quite difficult, as you will soon see. So you can see that another device for controlling cost was the creation of very traditional orthogonal volumes, in which effectively two separate buildings, in which all the facilities of the museum are housed, and then link them in one corner, in which there is vertical circulation tying them together and structural dependency tying them together. But at the same time, every auxiliary space between the orthogonal boxes and the ribbons is a very, very important one that we use, sometimes for gallery spaces, sometimes for circulation spaces. It's not a pretty face appended to a box. And in fact, structurally, these ribbons hold the main gallery up in the air. There are no columns in this building, and the main gallery is one big space, slightly larger than this space we're in at the moment, free of columns. It's approximately 1.5 times deeper, at approximately the same height, with natural lighting. And you can see that it acts like a bridge with a concave structure beneath the gallery to help resist the structural buckling forces, and that is held like a bridge on either side by those ribbons. In terms of structural studies, we had another challenge, which is to marry the adventurous, let's say, geometry of non-repeating curves with the abilities of locally available skilled labor. And there are some very, very able skilled labor locally, but not on local authority budgets. So we had to find, again, clever ways of translating geometry into a language and a quality control mechanism that we could control from afar and get the right quality. And these are a series of drawings, like musical scores, if you like, which describe every one of the 5 ribbons as a series of radii, each one given a control number, and then in elevation you have the internal and external elevation of each one of these bands from the ground plane. So if all the computers were to shut down that night, you could still take this drawing to site and walk to that coordinate with a tape measure and go up in the air with another tape measure, 2 meters 20 next to point number 21. And you know that that is where that badge is supposed to start and end. So this is a very kind of old-fashioned way of creating paper quality control on site for the geometry. And engineering also started from the back of a napkin. This is Neil Thomas's sketch. Neil Thomas, a very capable engineer who I believe spoke here in previous symposium. And in turn, that also goes through the rigorous, complex computational structural analysis to advise on the kind of deflections we could expect from the metal. There are a few ideas involving natural light, that the local authority was very much against using natural light in the gallery. And we argue that by creating this, what we call a corduroy light, a striped light effect, we would harness the amazing quality of light that you get back for 10 months of the year in Israel. And because this is not an art museum, it's a design museum where 70 to 80% of the exhibits are three-dimensional, they could really benefit from an even ambient light rather than from spotlights or accent lights. This argument was bolstered by the fact that, for example, in the big committee meeting we had to show that, for example, the Mona Lisa is hanging under a naturally lit ceiling, just as an example. So it's not something that's impossible to do. These are some physical models looking at the relationship between the gallery and kind of amphitheatrical space beneath it. So when you enter the museum, you enter beneath the main gallery in a kind of cave. There is no front door to the museum. You realize you are in the museum once you've passed under this cave and look back and realize you can't see any of the city. It's a very introverted building. And once you've come in, you're actually within this courtyard under these ribbons. And the ribbons at this point splay in the air and become a shading device. The temperatures regularly rise above 35 or 40 degrees in summer. And these ribbons are designed in such a way as to create maximum shading over this inner courtyard. And it's worth mentioning it's a very small building. It's a building of under 4,000 square meters for a museum. And it capitalizes on the vertical and horizontal play between voids and empty spaces in between. And the main circulation route of the building is in a ramp that goes under the ribbons. And that encourages people to go in and out and in and out and in and out as they journey through the museum. One very important word that we must talk about is representation. As you are all familiar with the conundrum of how to show a project at its best light from the best angle, but we very often fail on the front of showing buildings from a bird's eye view, from afar, a very dramatic, objectified kind of view. And it was very important for us to show the client what the building is likely to look like in 5 years' time, when all the rust has doubled and cracked and corroded, and all the dirt from the sandstorms that collected on top of these walkways would start running down the surface of the building. And when we showed this image, and these group of images for the first time to the client, they were absolutely horrified. And a year into construction, they came to expect this. So when they got the finished building, they were so delighted that it wouldn't look like this, that it was a real palpable relief. But the idea of using a computer, which is a very polished binary tool, to create a view of something that's very textured and random and chaotic is quite an interesting one. It's wrong. In the quest to obtain the gradation in Horten, we realized that our initial idea was very naive and very difficult, if not impossible to achieve. Horten doesn't like being told what to do as material. It corrodes until it reaches a certain level of oxidization and it stops. And we tried various techniques like applying a kind of electrolytic coating to it. It didn't work, it kind of bubbled and cracked. We used another very interesting technique involving firing very high velocity molten metal at the Horten to create a forced molecular bond between the two metals, which gives you a kind of very delicate grade of finishes that go between brass and copper and bronze and Horten pure. But even that, after undergoing lab testing, started to buckle and crack. And the client at this point was ready to paint the building, and we absolutely refused. And then we found this amazing gentleman in Milan, who's the head of the Institute of Oil and Grease, as it's called. And that's an institute that's usually in charge of creating finishes for the motor industry. And he was very, very excited about the possibility of working on a building where this would be a new finish for a building. And he helped us develop an incredible finish that is not applied on the Horten, it's part of the Horten, and that's what made it so exciting for us. And it involves using a special oil, a carrier oil as it's called, which is 10 times more permeable than water. So in the same way that you would drop a drop of water onto bread and just go through it, eventually, a drop of oil on 5 millimeters of corten would eventually work its way through. It's very permeable. But if you impregnate the oil with the right kind of pigment, the pigment will stay inside the corten and the oil will go in. And that's a way of introducing, it's like staining wood. You introduce color into the depth of the metal. So it's not a finish that's slapped on, it's something that it becomes part of the corten. So this is the range of colors that we could obtain from that. And we chose the final 5, and these are the basements being constructed. You can see a little tape and a nail number 21. That is exactly that point of that drawing that I showed you before, where there's a control point with a nail stuck into the concrete and a reinforcement bar starting the setting out of those ribbons. In the meantime, very far away in Italy, these cassettes or formers were made. These are throwaway pieces of metal. So they were made, sent to Israel, concrete was poured into them, and then they were thrown away. And the purpose of these was to create permanent, accurate translation between local, wobbly concrete and precise factory-made steel for the ribbons themselves. These are the anchors for those steel ribbons. Were made locally, but based on very precise formwork. And this is a very, very small Italian man crawling inside the tubes, these ribbons. These ribbons are over 1 kilometer long. They are 500 millimeters wide, all of them, so 50 centimeters. If you take the reinforcement ribs that you see here beneath that, it means that brave man had to crawl through a corridor that is up to 12 meters long, 12 meters long at a time, and 40 centimeters wide, and 1 meter 20 to 3 meters in height. It's quite an experience. And once these were welded, so structurally, the ribbons are made as hollow welded tubes, like rectangular hollow sections, except that they twist all over the building. Sandblasted the corten, mounted it to test orientation and stability, and then very much like a nice big piece of schinken, they were laid outside in the workshop to cure for the best part of 4 or 5 months. And rain, and snow, and wind, and they obtain these beautiful natural patinas that come with being exposed to the elements. And only once they obtained a real patina that is true to the corten itself did we apply the oil mix on top of it to preserve the patinas. The oil, this is before the oil is applied. This is the first dry assembly to make sure that the geometry is continuous. This is the first container that arrived on site in Israel. I like showing this slide because the foreman on site sprayed this. It says, "Curves are unfair." I think that should be the name of the lecture, really. These are the bands or the ribbons being assembled on the building. You can see that there's some differential color between one piece and the next, depending on how they sat outside and how they cured and how much rain or wind fell on them. But we really like that richness that it offered. And the oil took a bit of that away, but now after a couple of years you can start seeing it coming back. The connections are mechanical, there's no site welding at all. Connections are 1 millimeter wide, which means you have a very, very continuous geometrical finish. This is the underbelly, so-called, which is the concave surface I showed you earlier in the section, which forms the ceiling above the area in which you enter the museum. And I can show this very quickly. Oops. So again, this is a 500 square meter concave surface, which we had to make out of an elastic surface elastic finish in order to make sure that it doesn't crack with the reverberation and movement of people within the gallery. And in one day, 22 plasterers were brought in from the morning till lunchtime to do the whole surface in one go, with a special elastomeric polymer, which means that this is one continuous smooth bump, and only interrupted by the sprinklers that you see capped in the ceiling. And then when it's finished, the ceiling is finished, you can see it here, it's a very smooth black silhouette. We kind of imagine this building in a way of being like an upside down slice of the desert where you have the topographical and strata of stone, and then you have a silhouette of a dune, except it's inverted here. The light modulators in the gallery were made as fiberglass elements that were very quick to assemble, and above them we used a very cheap product that we sourced from the kibbutz nearby. One of the kibbutzes who are very commonly related to industry, let's say, and invest heavily in various industries, mostly agricultural industries, invented a very cheap, reliable product, which is a electrical solar control panel for greenhouses, for growing tomatoes mostly. And we use that above the modulators to control the quantity of light within the gallery. So the entire 500 square meter gallery is controlled by something that was off the shelf, it cost $30,000 and costs $200 to maintain a year. And that is really one of the things we chose to do in a project which is so tightly funded, if you like. And then the gallery space itself is a very non-precious, simple box that allows as much flexibility as possible to the curator. And the building itself, the drama or the poetry of the building is only seen through the relatively small door, so that the gallery is a pure, uninterrupted gallery. These are some shots of the finished building. This is an activity garden that's next to the education wing behind the museum. You can see there's no door. As you walk in from the main piazza, you at some point are inside the museum, but there's no gate or door or any notion of transition between outside or inside directly. There are some climate control conditions, of course, at some point where you're entering into a cooled space, but that's not the official entrance. In fact, the ticket office is outdoors, it's here. And once you're inside the courtyard, you lose sight of the context of a relatively densely built, kind of ramshackle built city center with postmodernist shopping malls that we didn't really want to offend on one hand or relate to one another. So we created a relatively small building that's introverted. These are not escalators, by the way, they're just a very, very oversized balustrade. The signage for the museum was done also in a way that's something we do also often in-house. We have a graphic designer working with us. Not in this case, but it's something that we regularly engage in as part of the project. It's very holistic. The attempt is to treat every project very holistically and not segregate between graphic or product or architecture or interior. It's all one body of work. And in this case, the signage is flexible enough by being stenciled on the walls. But at the same time, there's a sculptural quality to it as the arrows are three-dimensional and rise from the surface of the wall to tell you where to go to. And as for the wish of the client, the words of the client when we started the project were, give us a building we'd be proud to put on a stamp. We didn't make it on a stamp, but this is one of the opening exhibitions. We made it on the cover of EasyJet magazine. So EasyJet, to celebrate their 15th anniversary, marked little pictograms of every city they fly to around the world, or every country they fly to around the world, with France and London, and they conducted a very brave attempt at pictogramming Holon as representing Israel next to Zurich. Also, another little twist, and this is not a show-off, it's kind of to describe what different people see in different buildings. And in this case, Porsche approached us in 2011 for the launch of their new 911 car, and we were, of course, very happy to give them to approve for them to shoot a campaign next to that building. But we didn't know it was going to be in black and white, and actually we loved it for being black and white, and we loved the fact that the building could carry its own weight, if you like, despite the coloration. Onto a different scale of a building. This is a retail center in Liège, in Belgium. In a similar vein, the city of Liège has been investing over the last 20 years tremendous amounts of funds in reinvigorating the city center with the Calatrava train station and Dominique Perrault buildings, and as part of that we were invited to create a shopping mall, which we've never done before. And we were at the time also looking at, similarly to the museum I just showed, looking at structure being the envelope as well. So how can you weld the steel to both be the structure and the envelope? These are shots from the physical model of the shopping mall, showing relationships between the two levels and this kind of head of a snake that is the shopping mall. This is a very short film that shows this process from sketch. The building itself is 350 meters long. It's a very long, sometimes double height, sometimes single height structure, like a Chinese lantern or a snake, and it ends over the river. And it's made as a series of pillars or panels that straddle the structural skeleton of the shopping mall. These are renders, these are visualizations we prepared before starting construction. This is the fastest new build project we've ever worked on, in the sense that there was no time. The conversion deadlines were such that we couldn't even have the time to produce a full set of drawings for the project. And the project was delivered with 7 drawings. And those 7 drawings were meant for the planning authorities. From a technical and execution point of view, this was a project that started by a hand sketch, went into a model, went into a computer model, went into an engineering model, and went into a fabrication model without ever stopping in a 2D stage. And that has its benefits and it has its drawbacks, of course. But for a very commercially driven, tight deadline project, this proved to be a very appropriate device. Fast forward a little bit. Then the end of this snake or lantern is frayed, so you have these beams that kind of look unfinished, and they just kind of fray and spread into the sky and just stop. And the cladding itself continues, and then stops beyond the edge of the building, so you have this kind of, the invitation to enter the building is from the side. It's very, very unfinished, if you like, or appears to be unfinished. My colleague yesterday spoke about the Olympics in London. This was a very, it was an incredible event in the life of the city that we work in and live in. And we participated in one competition, which we sadly didn't win, but I thought I'd show this in the context of the subject matter of the conference, in the sense that this was for a bridge that would carry, the main bridge of the Olympic Park, that would carry 500,000 people a day during the Olympics, but that had to shrink down to a capacity of maybe 500 or 1,000 people a day after the Olympics. So it was a 2-stage project, and we came up with the idea of creating a kind of weave or a stitch. What's unusual about this project is that the bridge itself is very, very wide and very, very shallow. It's 3 times wider than its span. So it had to be very, very fat, thin in one respect, fat in another bridge. So we treated it like a coil of thread where you stitch the 2 banks of the river together. And the idea was that during the Olympic Games, this structural stitch would support the deck, which 500,000 people would cross from one side to the other in the Olympic Park. And then most of the, as you can see in this physical model, the deck and central part of the bridge would be removed after the Olympics to leave just 2 little threads, 2 little stitches. So this is the original canalway of this old industrial park with the original footbridges from Victorian times. And then above them you see the weave of the bridge as it comes across and stitches both sides of the bridge together. And as we fast forward, lo and behold, and then what's left after the games are the 2 coils, which are much more of the scale of the original Victorian bridges. We become relatively small gestures that are local. They're safer and on the right grade to serve people visiting the park in its legacy mode, as it's what's called. But sadly, we didn't win this competition. But it's worth stating, perhaps, that this varies from office to office. We have some people would call it a success rate or a build rate. We tend to build 1 out of 3 projects, 1 out of 4 projects that we work on. And as architects, we are creative people who invest tremendous amounts of time and effort in outputting this creativity, and it's never the effort of 1 person or 2, it's the effort of hundreds of people. I was speaking to one of my colleagues here yesterday about how even the planners have a part of that building, and even the accountants have a part of that building, and the lawyers have a part of that building. And we have a duty to enjoy and to celebrate the projects that are unbuilt as much as the ones that are built, I would say. This is something we did in our neighborhood. We work, as I mentioned before, in a neighborhood called Chalk Farm, which is near Camden Town in North London. And there's a very beautiful, iconic building called the Roundhouse across the road from us. This was an old train station or train switching station, and it has been disused for many years. And in the 60s, became a venue for concerts and art installations. Pink Floyd played here, the Rolling Stones played here, and we are quite friendly. It's kind of the neighborhood theater, if you like, and we're very friendly with the director of the establishment. And he was talking to Ron and said, why don't we do something together? And we were commissioned to, or we actually created together with the Roundhouse this installation, which is a cylinder 8 meters high, so probably 1.5 times the ceiling height, made out of 6,000 rods of silicon. And the silicon grabs light and holds it in such a way that you can see it equally well from either side. And because it's a curtain, you can walk through it. So it becomes a screen that is interactive in the sense that you can't control the media on it, but you can physically move around it, see the same media differently from the inside, walk through it, and really perceive it in different ways. This is Ron disrupting one of the test films. And one of the nice things is that you have the projection itself, but you also have the backdrop or the leftover light that is thrown beyond it. And the idea here, which is something that we've been doing more and more of in recent years, is to become less imposing with our presence as architects or as designers and more curatorial, if you like. So we didn't actually create any content here. We only created the tool. and invited 10 artists to create content for this tool. One of them was, this is a film by Matt Collishaw, a British artist. There's a film made by Christian Barclay, a Swiss artist. And you see the way it commands the space, and the way it changes the space, and the way it offers performers a changing background to perform against. It was quite interesting. And then a year later, last year this went to Jerusalem as well. It was an outdoors installation. So we converted it to outdoors. This was in the sculpture park that Isamu Noguchi designed in the late 50s. So he's surrounded by Picassos and Henry Moores and Anish Kapoor there looking in the background. And then what you see is the leftover light as it casts over the people. Here a short interview.
I've known Marcus David, artistic director of this place, ever since they made a mistake and shows up with all the sculptures of mine. He stopped me on the street, told me about his plan to start doing installations. And we were like, "Come," and I said, "Yeah, let's make something round. Let's make something big. I know what, let's do a curtain." Mark said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And a year and a bit later, here we are. This is exactly what I described to you. The Roundhouse contained all sorts of performances and activities. And different things happening. This is a mini roundhouse, within the roundhouse. It is also something that can let other artists, performers claim it. I'm not a curator, but I'm very good at making wishes. And it's all to do with people that I have something to do with, not with everyone, but I could sort of anticipate what they might do when I was wrong every time. To my delight. That is the purpose of getting other people to do things. Kilometers of silicon instruments for this. 5,600 rods, 8 meters something. We experimented, played, tested the translucency of it. Also the because with other materials I would be worried that someone would yank it and try to do 1,000 Jane on it. But this material is so fantastic.
I'm going to now move on to the last project I will show today. This is a project that we were working on in Morocco, in Marrakesh, for a private residence with some guest accommodation for a French national of Moroccan origin. What this sketch shows is a volume that rises above the ground approximately 8 meters and descends into the ground approximately 4 meters. And this is an exact translation of local building codes. You're not allowed to build above 8, and you can dig 4 meters down. And what we did is create a 12-meter tall residence that's sunk 4 meters down to the ground. And all the earth we calculated that we would excavate in the process of creating this basement plus the forecourt in front of it, we would pile up around a swimming pool to create privacy instead of using fences or gates. So the idea was to create a language that's more suited to the desert context around us, rather than have kind of traditional fences. The site is situated just south of Marrakesh, Old City, which is to the north, on an old agricultural field, and it's facing south towards the Atlas Mountains. The first thing the client said to us was, "I want to have a massive house with plate glass windows looking towards the mountains." I said, "Well, the mountains are in the south." He said, "Yes." I said, "You are in Morocco?" He said, "Yes." He said, "It's now actually 47 degrees outside." I said, "Yes." And we said, "Well, we can't quite do it like that, so we will have to maybe convince you that we can do it slightly differently than that." And one of the first things we talked to him about and talked to some locals about was the traditional way in which riads or courtyard houses are built in Marrakesh, where the accommodation is built around the central courtyard. And these are never oriented north-south. They're always at an angle, either northeast to southwest or northwest to southeast. And this is to capitalize on as much shadow as possible on the internal walls of those courtyards. We also looked at some examples, clever examples like the summer palace of the King of Morocco, which is a relatively modest pavilion surrounded by a very generous body of water that cools the air. All the windows and apertures are facing north. There are very small windows that are facing east and west, and no windows facing south. So even though the Atlas Mountains are the backdrop, you have to walk outdoors in the cooler times of the day to enjoy these. You're not to sit behind glass and enjoy them. There are lots of other quite intricate traditional solutions to problems of solar gain and irrigation that we drew inspiration from, such as the sunken gardens that collect water and shade some of the trees and allow a kind of high-level irrigation of the gardens. Of course, the tradition of Moroccan tiles, glazed tiles, and with all the intricate symmetrical patterns. The kind of anchor of the daily routine of the Moroccan family, which is the hammam, the hot baths, and the available flora in Morocco. One of the most exciting things about the brief for this villa was that even though this is a very wealthy private client, and even though this is a very generous house for one family and their guests, he is very deeply patriotic and proud. And the brief was to design the entire villa using locally available materials, locally available skills, and not to import anything from Europe. So the whole villa was to be created locally, 100%. So going from that initial sketch, we looked at, in a similar way to Holon, where the solution of using ribbons or strips as a way of creating smoothness, we wanted to create planks that would, the slight difference in staggering of these plans would create an overall appearance of a kind of tent, like a Bedouin nomadic tent. We looked at some examples of fabric formwork, or ways of casting concrete onto soft materials in order to get a much more curvaceous and seductive finish. This is a montage of rods over a model. And we created some plaster casts using different kinds of materials in the office to really look at how this is by the way, in case it's not clear, this is the ceiling. So the idea was to make it appear as if the roof or the ceiling was resting on the walls of the villa and indenting it and making the whole roof feel like it's sagging over the structure, but made of insulated concrete. We then conducted, following the kind of more empirical, intuitive modeling, which is not precise in terms of the scale, but gave us a bit of a feel for it. We conducted some computer modeling using different simulated fabrics to look at how a fabric as a whole would behave when slumped onto these walls. The two modeling techniques are as important as each other, I would say. Or one individual plank and how that would sag under the weight of the reinforced cement within it, reinforced concrete within it. We took a very brave decision, and this is another important point to make, is when do you know that it's time to leave your precious concept alone and go to another concept? It's very important and it's never too late. We made this experiment and thought this looked a bit like a riglet string or like an inflatable castle for my children's birthday. So we decided against this whole idea. And structurally it didn't quite work, in the sense that it could work, but we would have to create such big walls and such big columns to carry the self-weight of the concrete that it wouldn't be worth doing. So we instead went towards a much more, no product placement intended down there. Instead, went for a solution in which the planks are very, very thin, side-cast concrete planks that have insulation embedded within them in a clever sandwich, spaced within 2 layers of concrete, which means you don't have to finish the planks on site on top like a traditional roof. You see these in a minute. Another aspect that we started engaging in is to develop a language that we could apply to many different aspects of the villa. This is a photo of the cracked clay outside in part of the site. And rather than employ more, let's say, conventional solutions of brise-soleil or shelves, we wanted to produce a kind of interpretation again of this very great local tradition of the musharabia, of the screen, that is both a privacy, sometimes a structural device, and very often a way of regulating the amount of light that comes into a space. And the idea was to cast bronze or aluminum into these cracks in the clay, and then wash the clay away, so you're left with an imprint of the cracks. And by doing that, as the light would shine in from the outside, you have the ghost of what was on the outside imprinted on the inside. We also had the most amazing pleasure in seeing how these very young artisans were working on the gelej, on the glazed tiles that are so emblematic, so iconic in traditional Moroccan Islamic symmetrical pattern making. And what's incredible is that the tools of this trade are very, very simple. There's an anvil that is made out of a block of limestone, and there's a very old hammer that's not very sharp. And there are sacks of glazed tiles that are around 80 by 80 or 100 by 100 that are glazed in a variety of colors. And these young artisans can take one of these, turn it upside down, and chisel it to an absolutely immaculately precise geometrical shape without any blueprint or any pattern or any computer or any printout. And you can see a few of these stars and crescents and diamond shapes that are produced there on the anvil by hand. And then these are placed upside down on the ground, like you see here. So you get this a very minimalist, abstract version of the pattern. And once it's finished, it's like a game, it's like a memory game. Once in a while, they would pick one up to check that it's black or green or red, put it back in its place, and when they're happy, they pour concrete over the whole thing, about this thick, and then they upturn it, and you have a perfect panel with a beautiful symmetrical pattern. And our client was very eager that we would develop our own pattern rather than use traditional patterns. So we did a bit of a study on 17-point symmetries and 14-point symmetries and all the thematical complexity of these patterns, and looked at a kind of progression of a form that would start from a very simple, traditional French import into Morocco, which is done with the herringbone, and slowly corrupted with cross lines and cuts to create different kinds of forms of tiles. When you put all of these together, you would get a variety of symmetrical patterns, such as this one that we could use in bathrooms or in the living room or in scoring different textures within the villa. And this is a floor plan of the ground floor, where you can see, again, a gradient of how busy the floor is in terms of tiling. So you have very plain, calm tiles in the bedrooms, and busier and busier tiling patterns in the ground public spaces where the client would host his formidable guests. This is a physical sample using just single color. You can see some images of the villa. The main villa, the guest villa, swimming pool, the artificial dew, tennis court, which is sunken, which we'll talk about in a second. And as you can see, there are very few windows in the building. Most of them are actually facing upwards, and they're very, very deep atria. So that every bathroom in the building, 9 bathrooms, has a natural light source, but it's not a source that would blind or bake the contents of that room throughout most of the day. There is an external terrace facing the mountains, which you can see up here, but that's through choice. If it's cold enough and nice enough outside, you can opt to go outside and look at the mountains. It's not something you get delivered inside. So east-facing windows for the morning light, and due south, you always have these planks. You never have direct southern sunlight onto the use of naturally sourced stone locally. It's just about to make some of the patterns that we looked at before kind of making an appearance in some of the guest bedrooms. Hammam. This is a kind of maybe not. Oh, yes. What you could just about make is that the topography, the topographical lines are not there to mark the topography. They're actually stones we intended to keep, boulders we intended to keep from the current site, and actually manually place on datum lines to reintroduce these topography lines as actual registers in the landscape. The water from the pool then circulates and filters down into a reflective pool, which helps to cool the hammam that is in that second courtyard. And these planks were all 30 centimeters thick, including the insulation, including this kind of terracotta finish, which is part of the planning requirements for Marrakesh. And then from the south, it's all one big opaque. One very interesting thing that we were planning to employ here is beneath the tennis court, just about a minute and a half, is to, again, similarly to the seating above Holon, is to purchase very cheaply local telephone line tubes made of concrete and bury them 2 meters under the ground. And by creating a labyrinth of concrete 2 meters below the ground under the tennis court, and only allowing 1 or 2 small apertures above ground, you could, using a very low capacity industrial fan, draw fresh air at 50 degrees or 45 degrees or 40 degrees from the desert air outside, down underground and into the basement. So the air that started as 50 degrees or 45 degrees would end up being 25 or 27 degrees by the time it came into the building, which means that you can use far smaller air conditioning equipment, which means a reduced cost, reduced carbon footprint, etc. And this is something that's possible when you have a large swathe of land, like in this case. I'll finish with a very quick anecdote about how do you get to build something like this. It's worth mentioning that the skilled laborers who were working with in Marrakesh were not speaking English, were not speaking French, and were not speaking Moroccan. They were Berber, which means that everything we had to communicate had to be translated from English to French to Moroccan, Moroccan to Berber, and back again. No email, no fax. So we started by doing a series of seminars where we would show sequence animations like this that explain the sequence of construction of key elements. And then we went on to the prototyping stage where we said, okay, let's take a very simple corner of the building and try and communicate it in the simplest possible way to enable the whole team to build without us having to be there. So we sent this drawing and this was what was built. It was of relatively poor concrete quality. It was certainly not 30 centimeters, it was more like 45 centimeters. It was back to front and upside down. And you can see that nothing was crisp. It didn't have insulation inside, and nothing was crisp because the formwork that was used was not shored up properly. So we opted to start sending rapid prototype models. This is just to tie the subject of from model to reality. The model wins over the drawing, and we sent a series of small models and asked the local team to build their interpretation of that model and send it back to us. So we made FedEx very rich, or richer. And this is what was sent to us, which was very correct for that piece. So they built these very neat, small little plywood models. And the moment we said, yes, that's great, and they gave us slightly more stern instruction in relation to the formwork, much better quality of formwork was introduced. And this is quite old, 4 years ago now, much better quality concrete was achieved in terms of the pigmentation and the insulation. And I will conclude by saying that the client went bust during the financial crisis, so we can still see this on Google Earth to this very day. And we're hoping for the client to reinvigorate their funds and complete the project because there's half a skeleton built. But that's the way of architecture sometimes. There's one kind of catching a bit of shade.